Hi, Pa. Leaving for Disneyland today? I can't, in good conscience, leave you without giving you more spiritual stuff to think about. All right. Mosiah the First's Exodus. In chapter 8, we saw how Lehi's exodus into the wilderness followed a pattern set by Moses's, including building a tabernacle and acquiring divine objects to aid their travel. That divine aid was also provided for Mosiah the First. Is implied by Amaleki's brief description of his exodus being assisted by the power of God's arm in Omni 1:13. From two key sources, clues in the published Book of Mormon and Fayette Lapham's recollection, we can see that Mosiah the First also followed a pattern set by Moses and Lehi as he led his own people on an exodus to yet another promised land, one that began with taking refuge at a mountain or hill, building a tabernacle, and discovering a miraculous instrument for divining God's will: the hill north of the land Shilom. The record Zeniff contained in the book of Mosiah reports that the wicked King Noah caused a great tower to be built on the hill north of the land Shilom, which had been a resort for the children of Nephi at the time they fled out of the land. That's Mosiah 11:13. The story of the resort or refuge at the hill north of the land Shilom is not mentioned in the Book of Mormon prior to this point, but the callback heavily implies that the reader should already be aware of it. What more can we learn about this missing narrative? Our published Book of Mosiah gives us enough information to reconstruct the context of the Shilom Hill events. First, we can see from geographical clues in the text that the land the children of Nephi fled was the land that Nephi founded when the main body of Nephites dwelt under Mosiah I led them to Zarahemla. The land of Nephi, 2 Nephi 5:7 through 28, and Mosiah 9:1, and also chapter 10:13, Alma 22:28, and 54:12 through 13, Omni 1:12 through 14. So, basically he's saying that those were all the verses that were saying the children of Nephi fled was the land of Nephi, where Nephi founded it, until Mosiah I led them to Zarahemla. The land of Shilom and its hill were close enough to the land of Nephi that King Noah had a watchtower built in Nephi that enabled him to overlook the land of Shilom. Mosiah 11:12. He also built a tower on the hill of Shilom itself, apparently a watchtower for the protection of the land of Nephi. Verse 13, that it was somewhat between the lands of Nephi and Zarahemla is made clear by the additional references to Shilom connected with travels between the two lands. In Mosiah 7, we are told of Ammon the first, who was directed by Mosiah II to travel from the land of Zarahemla to the land of Nephi in order to discover what had become of Zeniff and his people. En route, he and his entourage camped at this hill, which was north of the land of Shilom. Mosiah 7:5, and also verses 7 and 16. Similarly, after Ammon the first discovered Zeniff's descendants, now led by his grandson Limhi, he helped them flee from their Lamanite oppressors, and this time traveling from Nephi to Zarahemla. In making that journey, they went round about the land of Shilom in the wilderness and bent their course towards the land of Zarahemla. That's Mosiah 22:8, and also verse 11. Footnote: in relating Ammon the first's journey, Mormon provides seemingly needless genealogical information on Ammon the first that reveals him to be a typological mirror of Mosiah the first. Mosiah the first, a descendant of Nephi, whose line will accede to kingship, leads an exodus from the land of Nephi to the land of Zarahemla. Ammon, the first descendants of Zarahemla, whose line has abdicated kingship, leads an expedition from the land Zarahemla to the land Nephi. That's Mosiah 7:1 through 3. Ammon the first thus reverses Mosiah the first's movement to and from kingship transposes Nephi and Zarahemla in the journey's geography, and similarly exchanges Nephi for Zarahemla in his genealogy. When Ammon I's journey is understood as a mirror image of Mosiah I's journey, Ammon I's encampment at the Shilom hill, traveling south from Zarahemla to Nephi, would then reflect Mosiah I's encampment at the hill traveling north from Nephi to Zarahemla. So basically, kind of the midpoint. And so Ammon I is this one who comes down to Limhi and his people. And I think it's a different Ammon, Ammon II, as he's differentiating them by subtext 1 or 2. And I think it was Ammon II is the one who lopped off arms while defending the sheep. Anyway, what these two journeys tell us is that the course between the lands of Nephi and Zarahemla winds around the edges of the land Shilom, with the hill north of Shilom serving as a suitable encampment along the path. When Ammon I's party searched for the land of Nephi and reached this hill, they knew they were near their destination and encamped there, then sent a small advance party down into the land of Nephi. That's Mosiah 7, 4 through 6. Thus, Shilom Hill was a place where any group fleeing out of the land of Nephi could have taken refuge. Second, we know that from the callback that the fleeing occurred in the Lost Pages period prior to Mosiah I's arrival in the land of Zarahemla. The people fled out of the land of Nephi. They fled out of the land of Nephi, the locus of the original pre-Mosian Exodus Nephite nation. This occurred prior to the reign of Noah, contemporary with King Benjamin, whose reign occurred almost entirely before Mormon's extant abridgment. See Mosiah I, 1. The callback thus refers to an incident in the early Nephite nation in the lost manuscript period, accounting for why the mentioned incident is otherwise unfamiliar to readers. In a larger Book of Mormon context, variations of the phrase fleeing out of the land are used in two small plates narratives: Lehi's exodus from Jerusalem, see 1 Nephi 3:18 and 2 Nephi 1:3, and Mosiah I's exodus from the land of Nephi, that's Omni 1:12. Since the former is clearly not being referred to, it seems that Mosiah I's exodus, beginning with the divine instructions that he should flee out of the land of Nephi, verse 12, is the likely event referenced in Mosiah 11:13. Thus, we can see that near the beginning of Mosiah I's exodus, he led the children of Nephi to seek refuge at the hill north of Shilom, outside of, but within view from the land of Nephi. Third, the phrase children of Nephi is patterned on a distinct usage of the phrase children of Israel, appearing hundreds of times in the Hebrew Bible. While the phrase is primarily used there as a generic term for the biblical Israelites, a similar usage occurs only twice in the Book of Mormon, in 3 Nephi 29, 1 through 2. The remaining 6 occurrences are specifically referring to the Israelites of the Exodus. Their captivity preceding Exodus, 1 Nephi 17:25, the flight from Egypt, verse 23, the parting of the Red Sea, Mosiah 7:19, and the smiting of the rock, 1 Nephi 17:29, the provocation in the wilderness, Jacob 1:7, and giving the law and the giving of the law, Mosiah 13:29. Since the Book of Mormon uses children of Israel to evoke the Exodus led by Moses, the parallel, the children of Nephi in Mosiah 11:13, is likely meant to evoke the Exodus led by Mosiah the first. Footnote: notably, the phrase is used elsewhere 4 times, twice as a generic reference to the Nephites, see Mosiah 10:17 and 4 Nephi 1:39, as non-Nephites adopting a Nephite identity, Mosiah 25:12, and Mosiah the first's peoples at the end of their exodus, that's Mosiah 25:2. While the children of Nephi in Mosiah 11:13 could be an unusual generic reference to the Nephites, the context of their fleeing out of the land suggests that Mosiah the first's exodus is evoked. Mosiah and Fayette Lapham's account. In his report on the interview he had with Joseph Smith Sr. prior to the publication of the Book of Mormon, Fayette Lapham recounts a narrative of the Nephites that occurred after they had settled the promised land. Quote, "They found something of which they did not know the use, but when they went into the tabernacle, a voice said, 'What have you got in your hand there?' And they replied that they did not know, but had come to inquire, when the voice said, 'Put it on your face, and put your face in a skin, and you'll see what it is.' They did so, and could see everything of the past, present, and future, and it was the same spectacles that Joseph found with the gold plates. The gold ball stopped here and ceased to direct them any further." Footnote 9. Whew, there it is. Damn, what I was talking about. The Liahona stopped working because now they had the better instrument, the Urim and Thummim. Wow. Okay, so footnote first. Fayette Lapham, interview with the father of Joseph Smith, the Mormon prophet 40 years ago, his account of the findings of the sacred plates. The emphasis on the spectacles in Lapham's abbreviated account of the Book of Mormon's narrative is likely due to both Joseph Smith Sr.'s own interest in the seer stones and the fact that he had already discussed his son's discovery of the stones with the plates and their use in translation. Green Mountain Boys to Thomas Sharp, February 15, 1844. Wow. Put your face in a skin. Lapham describes the interpreter's finder using a tabernacle, the temple's portable counterpart, indicating a period between stationary temples. This narrows the incident Lapham describes to one of two periods, because there are only two gaps between the temples in the Book of Mormon: after Lehi leaves Jerusalem, but before Nephi builds his temple, and during Mosiah I's exodus. That's a fair account. I remember I was pondering whether there was only one temple. I don't know. I wonder if there's more. Well, this group is on the move again. I don't know. Does that mean there's still just one temple, or does it mean that there's one main temple and a portable temple? Anyway. The account also narrows these two possible contexts by giving three indications that the interpreters were found on an exodus. First, the finder of the interpreters echoes Moses in that he has a Sinai-like encounter with God, who asks him, "What have you got in your hand there?" This evokes God from out of the burning bush, asking Moses about his rod. "What is that in thine hand?" Exodus 4:2. Second, the seer's covering his face after an encounter with God is also part of the Exodus. When Moses comes down from Sinai after communicating with God, he has to cover his face with a cloth because it's still shining from God's glory. That's Exodus 34:29-35. In assessing the validity of Lapham's account, it is also useful to note its parallel here with Joseph Smith's own practice of a seer or scryer of covering his face with an animal skin, his beaver skin top hat, while using his seer stone. Footnote 10. For Joseph's hat as a beaver skin, see Manchester in the Early Days. That's a book. For further discussion relating to this use of animal skins for wrapping Israelite temple relics during the Exodus, see Don Bradley's American Proto-Zionism in the Book of Lehi, recontextualizing the rise of Mormonism. See also Meg Stout's The Beaverskin Hat, How Joseph Interpreted the Plates. I don't know. I'm still much more. I would understand him using a seer stone in a hat, but I still think the Urim and Thummim is the main way he interpreted. But third, this and he's talking about using the Urim and Thummim and a skin over the beaver hat. in the Urim and Thummim according to Lapham here. So, makes sense to me. Third, the seer has these experiences in a tabernacle. His people have erected in imitation of the biblical tabernacle that was first erected at Mount Sinai, Exodus 33:7. Again, the only early narrative of Lehi Nephi and the later narrative of Mosiah I fit the context described by Lapham. Small plates accounts of Lehi's and Mosiah I's distinct exoduses, however, do not describe the finding of the interpreters. The narrative of Lehi and Nephi prior to Nephi's building of the temple is allotted some 24 chapters. See 1 Nephi 1 through 19 and 2 Nephi 1 through 5. While the narrative of Mosiah I is allotted only 11 verses, Omni 1, 12 through 22, with Mosiah I's actual exodus given only 2 verses, verses 12 and 13, had the interpreters been found during Lehi and Nephi's exodus, we would expect it to be narrated there with the accounts of their acquisition of other relics, given that Mosiah I is also the person implied to have possessed and used the interpreters, chapter 11. All available evidence points to Mosiah I finding this relic during his exodus. A Nephite Moses. Just as noted, Lapham's account of Mosiah I and the Hebrew Bible's account of Moses at Sinai both have God inquiring what these men are holding in their hands. Footnote. The Lord's questions to Moses and Mosiah I strikingly echo the question asked by the Israelites when they first encountered manna. When the Israelites saw it, they said to each other, "What is it?" For they knew not what it was. Manna in Hebrew is a Hebrew word meaning "what is it?" For the Liahona is an analog to Aaron's rod and the pot of manna, and he went over that in chapter 11. Cool. So for Moses, this was his rod that would miraculously transform into a snake and then back into a rod. For the Nephite Moses, it was the Jaredite interpreters that would miraculously transform an indecipherable script into legible text. In light of Mosiah I's role as Moses leading the righteous Nephites away from the land of Nephi into a new promised land, it becomes clear that Lapham is here recounting a significant event that occurred during this exodus, the discovery of the Jaredite interpreters that would provide the Nephites with a new mode of revelation and ultimately initiate the translation of the Book of Mormon's golden plates. Replacing the Liahona. Notably, Lapham's account also explains why the Liahona, which guided travels during the lost manuscript period, is never used again in Mormon's extant abridgment and seems to instead be handed down as a relic of the past. Footnote, the Liahona is handed down from Benjamin to Mosiah II. In Mosiah 1:16, Alma the Younger discusses the Liahona's symbolic meanings in the context of delivering the Nephite sacred relics to his son Helaman. He immediately follows this with the charge, "And now, my son, see that you take care of these sacred things," suggesting that the Liahona was among the relics being delivered. That's Alma 37:1 and also 38 through 47. For more on the Liahona's sacred relics, see chapter 11. Let's see here. While Nephi implies that he also utilized the compass, which was prepared for my father by the hand of the Lord after Lehi's death, 2 Nephi 5:12, and handed it on to be used by his successor, by the time of Mosiah II's reign, it seems that it was no longer functioning. Thus, when his people needed to find the land of Nephi, also called the land of Lehi Nephi, they knew not the course they should travel in the wilderness to go up to the land of Lehi Nephi. Therefore they wandered many days in the wilderness. That's Mosiah 7:4. If the Nephites still possessed the directors, why were they without direction? Lapham offers an answer to this question. The Liahona stopped working after Mosiah I acquired the interpreters, presented as a superior instrument, a gift which is greater no man can have. That's Mosiah 8:3 13 through 16. The inferior Liahona was no longer needed and was, for lack of a better term, retired by God. Although this may seem like a small detail, it explains why the Liahona is never again used in Mormon's abridgment. Even during the extensive wars and journeys while continuing, like the parallel relics of Exodus in the Ark of the Covenant, to stand as a token of the covenant, handed down among the Nephite kings and high priests. Footnote, the sacred relics with the Ark as a token of the covenant, see Exodus 25:16, especially as translated by Harold W. Attridge and Helmut Koester from Hebrews, a commentary on the Epistle to the Hebrews. That Lapham offered a detail with such explanatory power without ever having read the Book of Mormon gives weight to his having been given this content from the lost pages by Joseph Smith Sr. Finding the Jaredite interpreters, with Mosiah the first echoing the Exodus pattern from his partial namesake Moses and ancestor Lehi, we can surmise that his acquisition of the interpreters also followed a pattern set by them. Just as Moses acquired the stone tablets touched by the finger of God, Exodus 31:18, and Lehi acquired the Liahona prepared by the hand of God, 2 Nephi 5:12, during their respective exoduses, we might expect Mosiah I's acquisition of the Jaredite stones touched by the finger of the Lord, Ether 3:6, to also happen during his exodus. Footnote, the interpreter's first possessor, the brother of Jared, also acquired them during his exodus, see Ether 2:3. This is interesting. If you are going on an exodus journey led by God, expect to find something or have something. The name of the hill Shilom bears a similarity to the biblical high place Shiloh, where the tabernacle and its relics, including the Urim and Thummim, were kept until the building of Solomon's temple. See a bunch of references from Joshua 18:1 and also 19:51, Judges 18:31, 1 Samuel 1:3 and also 4:3 and 14:3, Psalms 78:60 and Jeremiah 7:12 through 14. Whew. Making Shilom a fitting place for Mosiah I to have found the interpreters, his Urim and Thummim, and brought them into his tabernacle. Footnote, Shiloh was also identified in literature of Joseph Smith's time as a place of resort, perhaps illuminating Joseph's use of this term in translating the description of the Shilom hill in Mosiah 11:13. Israel were ever accustomed to hills and high places for their resort, to transact important concerns as well as acts of devotion. Shiloh, a noted place of such resort, was on a high hill. Ethan Smith, View of the Hebrews or the Tribes of Israel in America. Well, this also makes me wonder, sorry, I don't get on big, huge road trips out east much. I like doing the west because there's lots of cool stuff out here, and we have mountains. And I know our paltry Wasatch Mountains are nothing compared to when we get up into the Uintas, and those are just about as big as the Rocky Mountains in Colorado. But east of the Colorado Plateau, it's pretty darn flat. But they keep referring to these as hills, and I know back east, their mountains are like our foothills, and so my perception of mountain and foothill and hill would be quite different from someone else's depending on what mountains they had as reference, which makes me wonder, for them a high hill, is that like us going up on the foothills of our mountains? Like when we go up to a bench? Sorry, I'm just thinking of that. But I'm curious about how much of a hill is needed. It's a weird thought that I'm having, which is, how high into the mountain do you need to be for it to be holificated? Right? It's a weird question because it's like, does it really matter? No, But at the same time, I've often wondered, if you're trying to commune with God and you don't have much, and you're on an exodus and you have some sort of tabernacle, do you just need something that's higher than everything else around? Which I think would fit, especially if you're, going from place to place. Or is it like God sits there and goes, okay, you got this hill, but you could do better. Okay, over there, you see that other hill? Just a little farther, maybe another day's journey. Yeah, that's the one. I'm wondering if you do something like that. But that's the minutia that it's like, do you really need to worry about that? Shilom bears similarity. Oh, did I read that? Oh, yeah, no, let me read the footnote for this then. So this is his Urim and Thummim, and brought them into his tabernacle, ever accustomed to hills for their... No, okay, I did read that footnote, but there's another one here in a second. If the land was named or renamed in connection with this event, it may well be that Shilom was named after Shiloh for this very reason. Footnote, this explanation holds whether the name is understood to have been assigned by the contemporaneous Nephites or by a much later literary author of the narrative. Note that if the hill north of Shilom was the setting for Mosiah I, bringing the interpreters into the tabernacle, then this hill was also where the Nephite sacred relics were completed. Shilom bears similarity to two other Exodus events as well. The place where the brother of Jared took his molten stones to be touched by the finger of God during his Exodus was Shelem, named so because of its exceeding height. That's Ether 3:1. See, now that sounds like a mountain. And another mountain, Mount Sinai, where Moses first erected his tabernacle and where he received the 10 Commandments written on 2 stone tablets by God's finger. With Shiloh, Shelem, and Sinai as antecedent models for encountering God during a divinely led exodus to a new land, the hill at Shilom is the obvious candidate for where Mosiah I acquired the interpreters, with no significant alternatives between the lands of Nephi and Zarahemla. The hill is the only landmark or encampment between the place of departure and their destination, with a role in their exodus significant enough to garner mention. As known as a high place and resort on Mosiah I's exodus, Shilom Hill perfectly parallels Mount Sinai of Moses' exodus and Shelem of the brother of Jared's exodus, in each of which 2 stones were touched by the finger of God to give guidance to his people. Footnote, like Sinai and Shelem, the Shilom Hill provided a temple-like context for the theophany of giving of keys, Joseph Smith's term, for the interpreters, see chapter 2. Evoking his teaching on the giving of keys, the rich can only get them in the temple, and the poor may get them in the mountaintop, as did Moses. Discourse the 1st of May, 1842, as reported by Willard Richards. That, I chuckled at that earlier when I read that, because I thought, that's a kind of witty commentary on the idea of, hey, if you're prosperous enough, then you'll get a temple, and if you're not prosperous, you can still commune with God up in a mountain. But if you're destitute because you're on the move, God can give you important keys to things, like literally the ways that you can find out how and where God wants you to go and such. God. Huh. This is really cool and interesting. Let's see, that is a super short one. Yeah, let's read these 2 last subsections here for the day, because I just want to make sure that I'm not running late. No, actually, I'm going to stop it. This is going to be a shorter one. That way I can get ready. I'm going to be up there way early anyway, but this is... I'm sorry, I'm finding this fascinating because I keep thinking of, all right, so if ever you need to recap my thoughts that I'm really getting from this is, if ever you need to go on an exodus, or you find that you're on an exodus because you are fleeing from the area and place that you're at this point. Create a sacred space, such as a tabernacle, filled with whatever important script and documents that you have, and scriptures, followed by which, if you have any holy relics, bring them. If you don't have holy relics, something tells me you're about to acquire some, and specifically when you find rest that you can go into your tabernacle and worship and inquire of the Lord, He will provide things to you for your journey and later stuff. Jeez Louise, you see that in the brother Jared, you see that with Moses, you see that with Lehi and Nephi, and you see that with Mosiah. But this was all pre-Jesus Christ. What happens in post-Jesus Christ exoduses? Do we have a post-Jesus Christ exodus? Well, let's see here. In the New Testament, they are definitely oppressed, and they definitely have people coming after them, but you get the great apostasy. The apostles get killed, and then they cobble together the Bible. The New Testament's pretty darn good, but the Old Testament is, it's been messed with by the Deuteronomists. But there is still a bunch of apocryphal and other texts that support the editing of the Old Testament. Because the New Testament tries to, again, restore what was lost from the Old Testament. I think that's one of the reasons why Jesus Christ is so mad at the scribes. Because it's always the scribes and Pharisees, but to me it's like especially the scribes, because if they took out all those prophecies and Jesus Christ was, hey, not only am I the fulfillment of them, ta-da, but you took out all this stuff that referenced me, and let's restore it, and let's quote this stuff that you've taken out. Because there's a bunch of quotes that Jesus has used, is that you're like, that works, and then, wait, where's that in the Old Testament? So Jesus Christ was restoring the Old Testament. And then there's all these apocryphal writings that help restore the Old Testament. That's trying to show that this covenant has been consistent across all of time. Not just, well, there's the Old Testament, and then here's this New Testament stuff. He's trying to say, no, it's been there the whole time. Let's restore it to what it should have been. And I'm the fulfillment of it. And would there be another Exodus? The only more modern Exodus that I can think of is the Church of Jesus Christ being kicked around from the east. So from Kirtland to Jackson County to Nauvoo, and then from Nauvoo to the Salt Lake Valley, but then it spread throughout the whole world. So what did Joseph Smith and Brigham Young have during their modern Exodus? And how much did it follow this pattern? They had the scriptures, they had the Book of Mormon. They didn't need to take anybody on to make some sort of king or political area. What did they have any relics for direction? Not really. They had the Spirit of God with them. Like Brigham Young coming over the mountains, sick in his wagon, going, no, this is the place, we're good. I mean, if I understand right, if I remember right, I was reading I think I was listening to Word Radio, or I read something that said that Joseph Smith did have a prophecy about the saints being pushed into the west and into the Rocky Mountains. So even Joseph Smith knew that, Nauvoo and all this wasn't going to be permanent. So, it's like this stuff came beforehand. God really helped the pioneers and the saints in some amazing ways. This reminds me of one thing that was, one of the first things that they did in the Salt Lake Valley, because the soil was just so poor. It was just like this kind of, look at all the places outside of the Salt Lake Valley. It was just kind of this scrub brush and other stuff like that, and it's like, what's going to grow up here? They started growing sugar beets, and the sugar beets provided the nutrients to the ground that apparently was perfectly necessary for this type of soil that they had. And it was just kind of one of those promptings that they got when they were first here. Well, what are we going to start to grow first? And that was it. And it worked. I can't remember where I heard that from. But there's a lot of things that that's what I'm gonna ponder on for today. Is how did the exodus from the east to the west of the Church of Jesus Christ parallel the other exoduses in the scriptures, and what was different? Because I don't think there's a tabernacle, because they had to abandon the temple at Nauvoo just after they had barely finished it and were being run out, and they finished it after Joseph Smith's death, and so they did not have much time at the Nauvoo temple. They did make an endowment house. It's kind of a tabernacle until the Salt Lake Temple was finished. They did finish the St. George Temple and the Manti Temple before the Salt Lake Temple. I guess that could be kind of their tabernacles. Don't think they had one while crossing the plains. I don't think they had. I'm wondering if a lot of this old Exodus stuff got replaced by the fact that you had the Spirit of God and keys of the priesthood. Which makes me wonder that if you ever had to do a modern Exodus nowadays, would it follow the Old Testament pattern where bring any relics you can, but bring your scriptures and such, like the pioneers did? Bring your scriptures and your spirit, and that's what you need? Or is it going to be bring your scriptures, the spirit, and some sort of tabernacle, and maybe God will give you your own little relics? Don't know. Anyways, I'll leave it there. Love you, Pa. We'll see you.